at the time, very bizarre. I was living in a bungalow in the middle of Hollywood working for well-known people in LA in their homes. And here I was in my tiny bungalow canning like crazy and storing food. And I actually had chickens in my little front yard. I had a couple chickens.
Chickens in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast.
Ona Lee Weatherford's journey with farming and food started here in Washington State, took her to New York, LA, and back home. And she shares why she's back here after the incredible experiences she's had as a chef who's now growing her food in rural Whatcom County up in the very northwest corner of Washington State. You'll enjoy this story as we continue our journeys here on Real Food, Real People. I'm Dylan Honcoop, your host, and this is documenting my journey all over Washington State to reconnect with the real people behind our food. So talk about what you grow.
Well, a lot. This is our first year here at this property. This is my first year growing this much on my own. We've got peas, cucumbers, melons, tomatoes, ground cherries, chard, collards, radicchios, sunflowers, peppers of all kinds, corn, squash, pumpkins, a little bit of allium, some turnips, beets, carrots.
That's a lot to keep track of.
I'm going for it. Yeah.
Also, each one of those has their own quirks of what they want, how they want to be managed, right?
Yep. And like I said, this is our first year here, so this is the first year figuring out where the soil's at, what kind of pests we have, how they get in, where they harbor themselves. Oh yeah, let's not forget all the wildflowers and herbs.
Yeah. And the chickens.
Yes, we've got chickens.
Who are making themselves known.
Yeah, Topic normally isn't this loud, but he tends to he's a little bit of a protective rooster. So yeah, he's kind of flexing on us here.
So what do you do with all this food? Is this just to feed your family?
Yeah. And neighbors, but yeah.
And neighbors.
I'm going, well, this is kind of the first step into my personal goals as well as business goals. I guess it's really mixed. On my mom's side, they're all farmers in Eastern Washington and Idaho and Oregon. So I grew up out there in the summers. And then in my own personal life, I started working in restaurants when I was like 14. And I did. There's one.
One car in the last 20 minutes.
I started cooking in Seattle, and then I trained in New York, and then moved to LA and did that whole roundabout thing. Came back to Washington, and then, before I left LA is when I started to first work on farms. I worked on a goat farm in Altadena that had goats for TV appearances.
Wow. Little different than up here in the very farthest northwest corner of the country.
Yeah, totally. It's bizarrely north, but honestly, I really like how I love how quiet it is. It's nice. I've had a lot of people mention, you drive 40 minutes to Bellingham? And I'm like, yeah. Oh, yeah. And they're like, I can't believe you do that all the time. I'm like, oh, I would much rather drive 40 minutes to Bellingham than live away from where this is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But anyways, yeah, so when I moved back up to Washington State, I was working in more kind of farm to table restaurants and splitting my time in a farm in Snohomish. I did some farm schooling. And Clara's was originally opened in Los Angeles in 2013. But yeah, basically I've kind of just been building up to where I want to be, which is raising the food for my own business too.
So yeah, talk about your business. Clara's. What is this? Where does the name come from? What's it all about?
All right. I started Clara's in Los Angeles in 2013.
Clara's Canning.
Yeah, Clara's Canning. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
in the wake of my grandmother Clara passing away. She was my country grandmother, and she had 10 kids. She raised them on a farm. At some point, she lost her husband and continued raising her own family on her own, cooking, sewing, cleaning, raising the food, working on a farm, apple packing, working in the post office, all of those. And at the time of her passing, she had 106 grand and great grandchildren.
Wow.
You would receive a letter or a card or something every single birthday. She was an incredible person with, I don't know where she got the energy, but in the summers, basically summer camp was going out to my family's house out there. We would go from grandma's house to aunt to aunt to aunt to uncle, because there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
And we canned and baked, and we spent a lot of time in her little backyard in Royal City. And later when she moved to Ephrata, like 10 or 20 or 30 of us out there canning bushels of peaches and corn and tomatoes. And those memories are probably some of the best of my childhood for sure. So when she passed, I was attempting to preserve that. And I didn't think I was going to start a business about it. I just started canning because I was heartbroken and I wanted to remember her.
Because that's what she did.
Yeah.
Well, like, how old was she? What era did she grow up in?
So she was born in 1929. She survived the Depression on a family farm. They raised chinchillas to get through. I don't know how that was the moneymaker, but they actually didn't end up doing so bad.
In those times, it was whatever you could do, right? But like canning, I mean, that's how a lot of people survived that time.
100%. And that's why I guess it ties all back into now. Originally, it just started with heartbreak and trying to resolve my grief and trying to preserve her memory. Because I lost my mom when I was 14 and she was there the whole time. So it felt like losing another piece of my mom, and it was just a lot. So I didn't really know why I was doing it. And it was kind of, at the time, very bizarre. I was living in a bungalow in the middle of Hollywood working for well-known people in LA in their homes. And here I was in my tiny bungalow canning like crazy and storing food. And I actually had chickens in my little front yard. I had a couple chickens.
Chickens in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, some people thought it was quite bizarre, but it was honestly the only way I could manage living in a big city like that and doing that type of work back then. So I was continuing private cooking and doing Clara's full-time both. And down there in LA, I was predominantly selling canned foods and selling at farmers markets and things like that. Since I've been back up here in Washington State, Clara's has transformed a lot. And finding the right kitchen space and getting through the permitting and things like that to sell. And also just my fear. It's like canning food for people is a little, I mean, I am very confident in my ability. Obviously, I've never hurt myself or anybody else, but it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, because if you mess something up, foodborne illness stuff, right? Botulism,
kill people.
Yeah.
It's an intense thing. I mean, it's something I absolutely, like I said, I have 100% faith in. But also right now, I feel more connected than selling people things. I feel more connected to teaching people things. And I do want to do both. I have long-term goals for how I want Clara's to continue to evolve. But that kind of brings us up to where we're at now in this current part of history. I think we're in a period where people have to have, whether you did that with your family, whether you've never done it before, I think there is something that can, like, this was only two or three generations at the most that we lost this type of self and community preservation skill. And I think people, I can see them light up when we're doing classes. I can see something inside of them something clicks, and I don't know if it's like a genetic memory or if it's just that proud, like creating something you can put in your pantry for years that you made yourself, that's safe, that either is something that you grew yourself or you got from a local farm. Like, it also, I think, wakes people up to the connection to where food comes from and the producers.
Yeah.
So right now, I feel like where I'm being called the most is subsistence farming for my family, raising my son in that, and providing that type of education and experience to people in our community. Because I also think that, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of money or in positions of power telling us that they have these new deals and new plans to save the world. And I don't think we need anything new. I think we have to return to something we've all already known. I think that the decentralization of food and because that stuff gets all big and scary. And like, honestly, I do know a lot about it, but I kind of avoid it in a way because what I want more for people is them to feel an excitement and a joy in just rekindling it. I don't really think that anyone needs any more weight of the world on their shoulders. I think not only does the food system need to become more decentralized and small and together, I think where our focus is needs to be a lot smaller as well. There's so much happening just on this little tiny road. There's always stuff going down. And there's enough people that I have to focus on that, like, I don't watch the news. I pay attention to what I need to pay attention to. But paying attention to my community, my family, my neighbors, who has more time for anything else?
Yeah. Well, people make time by not being as present, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone.
Oh,
because that's what it's about, being present with your community rather than your head in your phone all the time, work stuff, like you said, media and news. That's what I used to do. I was a news guy.
Yeah.
And when I left that world, I had to kind of detox.
Yeah. Oh, I 100% understand that.
Yeah, because I was like, and it started, when I was young, as I was just fascinated with it and follow all this stuff. But eventually it just became this burden. And I think that evolved with me personally at the same time that it was evolving in our culture to become this kind of heavy, like you said, it's carrying a weight. And do I need to carry all that?
What people need to care about is a lot more about the people that you directly can have an influence or you can partake directly in their assistance. Yeah. Obviously, there's larger world events that we do have to pay attention to, but the media circuses we are being thrown into is disastrous. We've never in history ever been subjected to something so incredibly vast and so constantly traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, I do think it's important to be informed, and I think that it's our job to understand how small things radiate outwards, connecting to larger pictures, for sure. Yeah. For me personally, I do tons of my own personal research by going directly to sources and reading charts and reading graphs and abstracts and
rather than just Googling
studies. I don't necessarily need someone to interpret studies and information for me. I can read the information and connect it to other dots and come up with what I understand. And maybe, I can reference like a trusted source. I think there are a lot of people who are experts in their field who interpret. I'm not an expert.
So what kind of stuff do you research?
Food systems. I'm very new to what I'm doing now in a way. Like, I have lifelong experience with a lot of things that surround food. But if you want to look into soil, if you want to look into the history of heirloom seeds or seed saving, you want to look into the health of soil, agricultural systems. Those are all such vast topics.
Yeah.
And the amount of time I actually do get to sit down and research things is not massive. But basically what I mean is that I could put my head down into those things and focus on my community, my family, my neighbors, and have no time for anything else but that. And I also know that from what I've understood through researching, through speaking with other farmers, through experiencing in my family, and the way that we grow food and the decentralization of food is the answer to a huge combo of problems that, like I said, there's a lot of people out there offering solutions to try and reduce the harm to that their systems cause, but they still want the systems to exist.
Right.
And I think that people feel really hopeless right now in a lot of ways. They feel powerless. But even if you're just growing a few tomato plants and some potted herbs, even if that's all you can accomplish in growing, think about the amount of waste that reduced just there.
Yeah.
And also I tell people to start with herbs and tomatoes because it definitely goes a lot farther once you get into it. It's addictive.
Yeah.
But that is something so small that is so powerful. And it is so healthful for you and your family, not just only physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. That's pure joy.
Yeah.
So, while I am still a private cook and I do still run a business and I teach classes, and I'm working towards larger goals, like I said, I feel really called right now to help people process the hopelessness, because I feel like with the amount of loss that I've experienced in my life, I've been in that place that felt so hopeless. And honestly, the thing that pulled me out was growing food, my chickens, canning, and connecting with my neighbors and people and my family.
I'd briefly like to stop here and thank our sponsors, Dairy Farmers of Washington, for one. They've been sponsoring the podcast from the very beginning. We appreciate their support, and we appreciate the stories that they share as well about real Washington dairy products, the farmers, the cows, the fields, everything that produces delicious and nutritious dairy products here in Washington State. It's like almost nowhere else in the world, and you can find out all about it at wadairy.org. They've got events, they've got recipes, farmer stories, nutrition information about dairy. Check it out. Again, wadairy.org. Also, Mana Insurance Group, another sponsor of ours here on the podcast. We're very thankful for them, and we're very thankful for their mindset, which is not just to pick up the pieces when things go wrong, even though they'll certainly do that, but also to help you plan ahead to protect your financial future. They protect mine. They'd like to protect yours as well, and you can check them out online, manainsurancegroup.com. Now back to our conversation up in, I guess it would be Kendall, Washington. Maybe the address is Sumas. I don't know for sure. Rural Whatcom County with Ona Lee Weatherford. What made you feel so hopeless? What was that time like for you?
Oh, my Lord. So my parents split up when I was really young. That honestly was probably the least of my worries as a child. My mother married someone who was very disastrous, I'll put it that way. And while I still have compassion for him and what his struggles were, I feel like in a lot of ways they resulted in my mother's illness coming back and her not being able to take care of herself.
What was her illness?
She had cancer for the first time when I was about 4. And so she originally went to a place called the Oasis of Hope in Mexico that was like an alternative cancer treatment facility because she knew how painful chemo was to go through. So she was just willing to do anything else. And it worked. She was cancer-free 100%, no surgery, no chemo. And it lasted 10 years, but the issue was it was contingent on a diet that was pretty strict. And in the depression through that relationship, she wasn't able to continue on that diet. And it was also very expensive. So when the cancer came back around again, she did not have the money to do the alternative treatment, and she basically refused to do standard treatment. And at the time, I was really upset because I was like, you just do whatever you have to, I guess. At this point in my life, I understand it's everyone's personal choice. It's no one else's business. You know, so she passed away, and I was 14. I felt I was very lost as a teenager and as early 20s, but I feel like cooking saved me. Working in restaurants, even though it's kind of a wild place.
Yeah.
And I was young. Hey. And I started working. Well, so I went kind of around Seattle, but I moved to New York City because I thought either I would get into arts or I would cook. And cooking worked out first. I ended up training at the Spotted Pig with April Bloomfield. So I moved to LA. I married, divorced, and I married very young. I married the first time at 22. So basically I'd just been processing the loss of my mom. Then I lost my grandmother. Then my marriage fell apart. And then I just had a feeling it was time for me to get back to Washington. So I packed up my little pickup truck on the goat farm in Altadena. I just moved back home on a whim. I just had a feeling there was something up with my dad, and there was. He was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer within a week, about 2 or 3 weeks of me moving back home. So I feel like Clara saved me the first time when I was dealing with the loss of my grandmother and my divorce. During my dad's illness, I had to put pretty much everything down. I was still working on a farm. I was working at Sitka and Spruce in Seattle, cooking. But I didn't have the capacity to run a business. So after 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, my dad passed away. And then within 2 weeks, I was pregnant with my Lloyd, who was named after my dad and my dad's grandfather. So after about 2 years of, just taking care of a baby, we ended up back up here, and I reopened Clara's in 2018, 2019. So I feel like Clara's has kind of saved me again, over and over. And in a weird way, it's like I said, I'm pretty, I don't want to be a downer to people. And I know that people are like, I don't want you to get too personal. It's your business. I'm like, but this is like there's a lot of
that's the important part, though. It's the humanity of it.
Well, it's like farmers aren't raising food because they just want to be a business. Artists aren't making art because they just want to sell you. I mean, some are, but there's a lot of people out there who are putting their absolute entire heart into every single thing they do, which is another aspect of what I enjoy, is propping up other people and talking about what other people wouldn't say about themselves or their business or what they produce. Because of what I've been through and because of the amount of work that I know goes into creating food and creating art and creating products, I feel like I can speak on others' behalf in a way that I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I will be your biggest cheerleader. And I want customers to know that. And we kind of mentioned, the double-edged sword of social media. It's a wild beast, and honestly, sometimes it is overwhelming, but at the same time, it's the way you use it.
Yeah.
Mostly who I'm following is like farmers, creators, writers, and inspiring people in general. And I feel very connected through it, and I feel like I've been able to create so many little micro relationships with so many customers and clients over the years. I have people that have stayed with me from the very beginning, 2013 iteration of Clara's all the way to now. And I have people who have hopped on it because during COVID with shutdowns, it was very hard to, events and private cooking and all that was just gone. So I ended up doing delivery picnics and basically doing like farm to table delivery food for people and like fancy dinners that they could eat in their garages with their friends and stuff. And that was a very, very successful program. However, that was specific to that era. It's not something I want to do. I mean, I do want to bring back aspects of it, but the overall large goals for Clara's really is like a farm bed and breakfast with a cannery and raising the food for the farm, like the farm raising the food for the cannery and the bed and breakfast and having it be a place for with education as well.
So originally, Clara's was you canning food and selling it.
Yeah,
right?
farmers markets in like the Los Angeles area.
And now that it's evolved through multiple stages of your life, right now you're growing food just for yourself, not to sell, but your business is sharing your knowledge with other people, right? Like education is your primary outlet via and Clara's right now.
Education, private cooking, and then the farm store, which is like connecting customers to bulk amounts of local food so that they can store food. And so if I'm going to sell you a 25 pound or 50 pound sack of local wheat, I have to show you how to do stuff with it. Right. If I'm going to sell you a bushel of peaches, you should know how to process it.
Yeah.
So it kind of is all encompassing in that. And like, it does kind of seem, and it is still in such a evolutionary phase that at times if you were to just jump in right now, or if you haven't seen kind of the bigger picture, there are people that kind of need clarification as to like, what are you doing? I'm building something. I'm building towards something that I've seen in my dreams essentially for years, and I don't necessarily have the funding to just build it all in a day. So I'm taking the long road. And again, with social media, people are so used to seeing things happen so fast and so quick. But that's why I am pretty grateful for everyone that follows and interacts with me, and who is in it for the long haul.
Talk about your cooking. I'm interested in that. Like, you started way back when being trained as a chef.
Yes.
And probably worked in some pretty fancy places.
Yeah, I've got Michelin-star training in my background, yeah.
Wow.
So my very first cooking job was at a tiny family Greek restaurant in Lower Queen Anne in Seattle called Panos Kleftiko Greek Taverna. Some of the best Greek food I've ever had in my life. It was a family operation, and basically my mom's side of the family, me and a bunch of cousins and my siblings, were like the workforce there for about 10 years. We even at one point had an apartment above the place. It was very funny. And then I worked at Emmett Watson's Oyster Bar in the Pike Place Market. So I had my very classic Seattle like go-to spots. And then in late 2008, I packed up a van and moved to New York City. My dad was born and raised in very many generations Washington State on my dad's side, but he also had grown up in New York partially. So when I was picking places, basically when you want to cook and you want to do like, and this is changing, which is cool because I think you shouldn't have to move across the country to get a good resume. You still can for sure. But at the time it was basically San Francisco or New York City. And I was definitely like, it's New York City. So we hopped in a van and we moved across the country. Moved into, back then you could still live in very interesting warehouse spaces in Brooklyn for very cheap with 20 other people.
Wow.
And yeah, I originally started at a place called the Manhattan Inn. And then some of the people, the cooks and chefs that worked there had worked at places like 11 Madison Park and I don't remember anymore, but I know that for sure. Anyways, they had great resumes and it was a very small, interesting cafe. And they basically said like, you got to go do something. You have to go push yourself. And I was like, okay. And I was a bit of a wild child. So I started at the Spotted Pig with no culinary arts degree, no official, real formal training. They kind of like helped me slap together, like they taught me like simple words like mignonette and brunoise, like very simple things that are like, if you're going to fake it, you have to like look and act and talk this way. I'm like, okay. Didn't work. I mean, I'm sure they saw right through the fact that I really had no idea what I was doing, but I had a lot of heart and I had a desire and I can work hard. My first 30 days at the Spotted Pig, I was fired. I was almost fired every single day for the first month, 100%. The morning sous chef did not have time for me. But I ended up carving out a really great experience there. I stayed for almost 3 years. I ended up working every single station in the entire kitchen. I think if I had stayed any longer, I probably would have been a sous chef, but I got to lead line before I left. And my chef de cuisine, Ralph Johnson, was moving to Los Angeles to start his own restaurant. And yeah, he asked if I wanted to go, and I was like, yeah, why not? The thought of just moving across the country multiple times in my life now at this point is so crazy, but yeah, back then it was fine. So before I left New York City, I ended up working at Speedy Romeo for Justin Bazdarich, who at the time didn't have Michelin-star restaurants, but now he has, I think, 2 with a star. He's excellent. He's a wonderful person. And then, I moved to LA. The restaurant Ralph opened. I personally in my own life was going through some things with my marriage, and the restaurant didn't end up being the exact vision that we wanted. It's hard. Like the chefs are the artists and the owners are the money people. So it's like this constant kind of like ebb and flow. Like, what can we get away with? And what are we allowed to do? And sometimes there's those moments where those two components gel extremely well. I was not that component. And I have a hard time keeping myself away from being honest in those situations. Which is probably why I own my own business. Because I have to be as honest as I want to be. So I ended up falling into private cooking because of that.
How does that work? You just go into someone's home and
It's either for parties or just for, I mean, there's some people that just have chefs that basically live with them. I never did that kind of private cooking. I don't like, okay. I don't like the way that there's this kind of thing when if I mention who or what, there's this like kind of like look people get like they want to know everything. And it's like, honestly, I really respect people's privacy no matter who they are. So I won't say who. All I can say really is that if I walk into a magazine rack, there's still to this day, I see people that I've cooked for.
Wow.
In their homes or at the Spotted Pig or whatever. And I had it was pretty decent. It was a good experience. I was like in my mid-20s doing that in Clara's. And I had never made so much money in my entire life. Bought myself a pickup truck. Like, I don't have any of it now, but yeah, I mean, you can go from that to living in a trailer with a baby on your hip in just a couple years, which is what I've experienced. Yeah. I mean, just 2 years. This is like funky. It's a 70s mobile home. It's an interesting plot of land. I'm struggling keeping up a little bit with the weeds and stuff, but I mean, literally 2 years ago, I was living in a trailer with a baby on my hip. So I'm pretty proud of myself.
Yeah.
For being able to, I don't know. Yeah. It's been a really wild ride. Like my entire career basically is just, an interesting constant evolution, which, some people are kind of like, how do you do all of these things? I'm like, I don't know how to not. And this is me not being a workaholic anymore. Chef life is like sometimes 18. I mean, I still pull 18-hour days sometimes if it's,
when it's go time.
Yeah, when it's go time, you have to. I can pull those out of my hat when I need to, but I don't work 6 to 7 days a week anymore. 12 to 18 hours a day, every day in a New York restaurant. But
wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically my life right now is I'm a stay-at-home mom. I own and run Clara's. I am doing subsistence farming for my family. I mean, all three of those are basically full-time jobs. I've just been able to condense most things that I do into a very small space. Say for when I'm cooking for people privately, or when I'm teaching classes off site here, I don't leave. I don't want to. I don't need to. Which is what makes it possible to do all of those things and to also still live a decent life. I feel like now I'm the most clear on what my future goals are with Clara's and with what I want to contribute. And I think also too that the going from a relatively high place in my career to no career, like raising a baby, no career, lowest place, is what has kind of driven me to want to participate a lot more. Because back then when I didn't have much, like I was a food bank customer in Bellingham, and farmers supply a lot of food there. Mm-hmm. And they're very kind. The Growing Veterans mural on the guide, Keep Growing, I didn't know that this was when I first moved here almost 5 years ago. I didn't know that was a farm. I just thought that was someone's random mural. I didn't have any idea what it meant. But honestly, that kept me going. And because there was a lot of times I had no idea what else to do. And me and my sister would go drive around out to the county and just go to farms and find farm stands. And after doing that for about a year or two before I reopened Clara's, that's like how I was able to have a source base for what I do. And all of those relationships I've just continued to build on. And it's been great. Like the farmers and producers in Skagit and Whatcom County. Just incredible. The amount, like, I just really hope people know how lucky we are. I could sing that from the mountains forever.
What is it that you think people should know about their food and where it comes from and who it comes from?
Well, I mean, something really interesting that I've researched and looked into was Chef Dan Barber of, I hope that I'm getting his name right. He was the chef creator of Stone Barns. He's also like a scientist, and he's done incredible studies on food, and he found, like, through pure scientific testing, found that food that's grown, not just like conventional, organic is still in the conventional category as far as this testing goes, but food that's grown smaller with more interaction with people, and the people are like genuinely invested in what they're doing, is scientific. Like, its compounds are different than food that's grown completely mechanized and industrially. So there is like, and you can feel that. I mean, I do like when science aligns with what we feel.
Yeah.
I love when science can prove intuition right, but there's a spark in food that is grown by people who care about it. And I think hey, Nathan. I think it behooves...
The neighborhood.
Yeah. I think it behooves people to invest in that, not only for the people that are growing it, but for their own health. And that's why it's a symbiotic relationship to put your money into not only your own health, but into your community. And, well, I mean, I'll keep saying it, but I really, truly think that people participating more actively in local food systems will have such a huge part in saving the world as it is now. So, I mean, if you feel hopeless, if you want to save the world, eat local food and grow food, even if it's a pot of herbs, and let yourself get addicted and go on more than that.
What's the biggest challenge to all of this? What's the biggest challenge with growing food?
It's heartbreaking sometimes. Even for plants, but like for chickens, we had to figure out like 3 different designs because we're out in the wild here. I've lost 8 birds this year. Every single one I raised from a chick, and that was heartbreaking. It's hard to have the time to keep up with the amount. It's literally a living organism. It's essentially a homestead or a garden is like a cell that you create that is an organism that constantly needs some type of interaction from you. Yeah. There's a lot of perennials and a lot of easy things you can toss in there, and that's great, but making sure that you can find the time is really important. But I'll also be the first to say that, like, even with how proud I am and even with how happy and joyous my life is now, I still struggle with depression. I still struggle with overwhelm and freezing. So, like, I feel like that's another aspect that I try to... I'm not going to pretend that everything's perfect online either, because that, I think, gives people the wrong impression. I want people to know how hard this is. But even with how hard it is the most gratifying thing you'll do.
I think we're coming around to that as a culture.
Yes.
Where we've been told like the easiest way is the best way. And I think there's a strong desire to like, no, I want to do hard things and feel rewarded for having done that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that is the illusion breakdown. And again, we can always come back to how the internet is a double-edged sword.
Yep. People
are able to see through a lot of, before we had access to a wider database, essentially, you really had to just accept the information that was provided to you from only a certain amount of channels, and convenience culture was sold to us. every single time we've been to a major war coming back, post World War II era was a huge evolution as far as convenience food goes. Post Vietnam era was a huge evolution. Post Desert Storm, huge evolutions. That's a whole different.
Yeah,
we could talk.
Yeah, for sure,
and we won't. But there's reasons and there's connections there. But I think now people are finally starting to understand that we have been sold somewhat of a lie as far as the convenience culture goes. Because, yes, maybe it's convenient now, but the cost or the health issues later, that's not convenient. So you can put the work in now, and that is truly sustainable, not only for you, but for, And the other thing I love so much about it is food is for everyone. And producers span the gambit of types of people. And because of my dad's side being more artists and designers, architects, my dad's grandfather was the architect designer for the floating bridges to Mercer Island in Seattle, Lloyd Lovegren. And on my mom's side, they're country folks. So I have a 50-50 experience with both sides. And I've lived my life essentially half in big cities and half out in the middle of nowhere. I think I'll stay out here for the rest of my life. But I can see both sides, and I can see the bridge that we need to gap with people. And
how do you do that? You have, again, plenty of time in the big city.
Yeah.
What is the gap that even needs to be bridged?
First of all, if you don't know somebody, you can't understand them and you can't respect them. And that goes on both sides. City folks don't really know country people, and they have these, again, media assumptions based on who they think they are.
Stereotypes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're easy to dismiss based on these stereotypes. However, on the other side, again, there's a lot of stereotypes as to who non-rural people are that country people are getting from different sources.
City slickers.
Yes.
Yeah. No, they're people too, and they may not be as dumb as you. Yeah.
No, and nobody is. Yeah. And honestly, that's another thing that would truly save us is like, why are we putting so much effort into putting our hopes into these folks that we don't even know? They're coming from far off places, creating laws from buildings we'll never see, letting them dictate who we are and who we will or will not interact with. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I think, again, people are starting to kind of break out of that a little bit. At this point, I feel like maybe the need or severity has grown to the extent that people are starting to, if this was a fence and the fence that you're looking at is like the media blocking out what you should be looking past, like at this point, I feel like a lot of people are starting to kind of be like, wait a second. And like, I'm not saying don't participate in like everyone's free to participate in what they want. But what if we put that much effort, into local government and to each other, as opposed to like, I don't know. And so I think at this point, the more people understand in cities who producers are, and the more producers understand who their customer or like their base is. Because again, if people are going to return more to family style farming, then you will have so much more connection to your customers. Whereas if you're doing bulk farming, then bulk or co-op farming, you're not really having any interaction with them. So, that connection is lost. But like Steensma Farm, they were doing bulk dairy for a very long time, and they broke away, and they're starting to make their own products from their own dairy and go to farmers markets and do that whole thing. And
we had Ellie Steensma here, one of the the two sisters that are going for it and taking on the next generation of that farm. We had her here on the podcast.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I did the food for Ellie's wedding.
And she actually works with me now.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, their story and their farm is so inspiring and so beautiful. Standing in a barn that like 4 or 5 generations of people lived all in that same place that still exists. It's still, and they're still evolving. They've started to utilize robot milkers, which is incredible. Like, if that's what you need to continue and to actually evolve and progress forward, like, incredible. That's great. And I think that, because that's the heartbreaking thing, is there are so many farms that don't have those children at the end of it that want to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And with the cost of real estate and things in Whatcom and Skagit County, it's a big paycheck to some people to cash out. And sometimes the farm needs a lot of work. There's a lot of struggle, and I'm not judging where people take it, but when people can salvage it and carry it forward, I mean, because that's actually a huge drive for me. If I were to not grow food or farm, I would be the first generation on my mom's side to not. That I would be the chain breaker. There is no generation that exists on my mom's side that didn't farm, to our knowledge. So, that seems like a generational curse. I can't allow to happen.
Curse or a blessing?
Well, that's what I mean. Like, if I were to not, like, I just can't. There's nothing in me that could let that go.
Yeah.
And there was almost a break in the chain because, like I said, my mom, she was raised on a farm, and in her first marriage, she was a farmer. And she divorced and married my dad, and he's not a farmer, or he wasn't. And she wanted to go more into arts. So my first 3 siblings were raised on a farm. Me and my sister were raised in Seattle. So there was already kind of that disconnect, but just from having that connection of going back to Eastern Washington and seeing my family and being there, was what kind of, and like I said, I feel like if I have the ability to kind of be a conduit between 2 different areas, if I can combine rustic, comforting, like country food, but with a higher end training, if I can connect producers to customers and customers to producers, then like I feel like I have to do that. And if I can be the one in my family line that doesn't let the chain break, then I have to.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I won't say I'm an expert, and I won't say that I'm like, I've got the biggest, most beautiful thing going on, but I'm doing it.
But that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And that's what
it's
I want.
Real.
Yes. And that's what I want people to know. Like, it doesn't matter if you kill things. It doesn't matter if it doesn't always look beautiful. Like, just start somewhere and don't let it be that would hold you back. And yeah, I mean, and like I said, I still have my moments, and there's still grief, and there's still life, but I have never been more fulfilled and more happy and more, there used to always be this kind of constant anxiety and like fear and tightness and just like dread, and I had no idea really where it came from.
Yeah. And
you know, there was a lot of like solutions that were proposed to me from a medical standpoint that A, didn't fix it, and B, and no shame to what people have to do. Like but for me personally, I've found that I needed to be completely grounded. I needed to be grounded in my surroundings, and I needed to be connected to something. And, you know, there is a heartbreak that there isn't a farm in my family to pass down, really. But just the idea that I could be the one that starts that for hopefully Lloyd and whoever else comes along. I don't know. It's just a lot of those ailments for me have kind of dissipated, and also just the hard work, like putting your, like, I really truly think that, like, ancestrally speaking, if you go way back into like our prehistoric selves or more like primal selves, that we have these buildups of anxiety and all this stuff because you need those energies or chemicals go into either hunting or gathering or finding, or that am I going to be able to come up with enough for today?
If you don't do that anymore,
where's it going to go? It turns into violence towards each other, and and to me it's not, I mean, because not everyone kills their food, technically speaking, I suppose, but no matter what you eat, whether it's vegan or meat or whatever, the most important thing is where it comes from. It's not really the what, and the how is also very important. And I think being able to exert the amount of energy that I have towards something that actually, because that's the other thing, I have a lot of energy. I have the ability to work very hard, but when you're constantly going out and providing that energy to something else, that when you go home, it doesn't, I mean, maybe you get a paycheck, but it's not building towards your own survival and subsistence in your life. It's really like defeating. Yeah. It's defeating to go out all day and work that hard and not really, I mean, you can pay the bills, but I don't know. I think that's really important for people.
Well, thank you for having me here to the farm and for being willing to share so much of your like personal story. Yeah. Because that's where your insights really come from. Yeah. You know, that's the why. Yeah. You're doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And, I've said this before to other, like, I share it because I know that I'm not unique. I know that lots of other people struggle with these things, and it seems like we kind of have an issue with coming to terms with grief. Yep. At this point, I can't be afraid of it. It's been so forefront in my life. Yeah. And also at this point, the feeling of pushing through all of those things to continually push forward and get to where you're going is so great. Essentially, everything's a wavelength. If you have your lows way down here, you can have your highs way up here as well, but you have to climb to get there. Yeah. And all I want is for people to get there. Yeah. And I want people to be able to hold each other when we're in our lows. And that's the other point. It's you can't do anything alone, really. It all takes each other. So.
Community. Yeah. Where can people find you online and become part of your online community?
I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Clara's Canning. And then my website is www.clarascanningco.com. And those are my main avenues right now, yeah.
Awesome. Again, great to get to come out here and see the farm. Mm-hmm. This is an incredible place.
Thank you.
And you've got an amazing story as well.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for everything, for the visit, and for sharing everything.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. It's been great talking to you.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. These are the stories of the people who grow your food.